If you heard tonight that the United States just bombed Kharg Island and you found yourself asking what is Kharg Island and why does it matter, this video is for you, because understanding Kharg Island is understanding the single most important economic leverage point in the entire Iran war. And Trump just used American military force against it in what he called one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East. Most news coverage assumes you already know what Kharg is. Almost nobody is explaining it from the ground up. I went through Foreign Policy's analysis, CNBC's expert commentary, JP Morgan's research notes, satellite imagery analysis, and the history of the island's role in Iran's economy to give you everything you need to understand why this 5-mile strip of land in the Persian Gulf is the most important target America has touched in 14 days of war, and why striking it changes the entire calculus of this conflict. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what Kharg Island is, what it does, why it was spared for 2 weeks, what Trump actually struck tonight, what he did not strike and why, and what happens next. Let's start with the geography. Kharg Island sits in the northern Persian Gulf, approximately 15 miles off the Iranian coast and roughly 483 kilometers northwest of the Strait of Hormuz. It is a coral island approximately 5 miles long and considerably narrower across its width. It has no significant civilian population. It is essentially an industrial facility in the shape of an island, and the industry it hosts is the export of crude oil from the enormous oil fields of southwestern Iran. The island's deep-water location in the Persian Gulf is what makes it so valuable. Oil supertankers, the massive vessels that carry 2 million barrels of crude oil or more per voyage, require deep water to navigate and berth. Kharg Island sits in water deep enough to accommodate these vessels, and the island has been developed over decades with the pipeline infrastructure, storage tanks, pumping stations, and loading terminals necessary to move enormous volumes of Iranian crude oil from the fields to the ships. According to CNBC reporting citing energy analysts, Kharg Island handles approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports and has a loading capacity of roughly 7 million barrels per day. It processes approximately 950 million barrels of crude oil per year. Iran earns most of its foreign currency from oil exports. Kharg Island is where most of that money comes from. Without Kharg, Iran cannot effectively export oil. The island was deliberately left untouched for the first 2 weeks of Operation Epic Fury, and that restraint was a conscious strategic choice rather than an oversight. Military planners clearly had Kharg Island on their target list from the beginning. It is not a hidden or hard-to-find target. Satellite imagery of the island is publicly available and has been circulating in defense and energy analysis circles throughout the conflict. The decision to spare it reflected 2 competing considerations. First, destroying or disabling Kharg would inflict catastrophic economic damage on Iran, but would simultaneously remove Iranian oil from global markets at a moment when those markets were already severely disrupted by the Hormuz closure, potentially sending oil prices to levels that would cause serious economic damage to American consumers and to the global economy. Iran's IRGC had warned explicitly that oil would hit $200 per barrel if Iranian energy infrastructure was attacked. Second, as long as Kharg remained intact, the United States held a last resort option in reserve. Striking it would use that option. Sparing it preserved maximum leverage. Tonight's strikes changed that calculation in a specific and carefully calibrated way. According to Trump's Truth Social announcement, the United States obliterated every military target on Kharg Island while explicitly sparing the oil infrastructure. The distinction matters enormously. Military targets on the island include Iranian naval and military facilities, air defense systems, radar installations, and any weapon systems positioned there to defend the island or to threaten shipping. By destroying the military assets while leaving the oil infrastructure intact, the Trump administration achieved 2 simultaneous goals. It demonstrated the ability and willingness to operate against the island, removing any Iranian uncertainty about whether the United States would cross that threshold. And it preserved the oil infrastructure as a target held in explicit public reserve, with Trump's Truth Social post making clear that infrastructure will be destroyed if Iran does not allow free passage through the Strait of Hormuz. JP Morgan's commodity analysts had anticipated this scenario and published their assessment of what full infrastructure destruction would mean for markets. They found that if Kharg Island's oil processing and export infrastructure were disabled, as much as half of Iran's national oil output could be at risk. With Iranian production near 3.3 million barrels per day and exports around 1.5 million barrels, the loss of Kharg's storage buffer and the lack of viable export alternatives would rapidly trigger upstream shutdowns across major southwestern Iranian oil fields. The previously assumed buffer of stored oil would be gone from the first day of a Kharg shutdown. The price implications of this scenario, combined with the already existing Hormuz closure, would be severe and would make the current $100 Brent crude price look moderate by comparison. The question of what Iran does next is the one that will determine whether tonight's strikes were a brilliant piece of coercive strategy or a dangerous escalation. Iran's parliament speaker Kalibaf had explicitly warned before tonight that Iran would abandon all restraint if American forces attacked Iranian islands. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who needs to establish credibility with the IRGC and hardline factions, faces enormous internal political pressure to respond strongly. At the same time, Iran's IRGC has just seen the United States demonstrate that it can operate against Kharg Island, that it held back from destroying the oil infrastructure, and that the explicit condition for not destroying it is reopening the strait. The coercive logic is clear. The question is whether Iran's political system can respond to coercive logic or whether its internal dynamics force escalation regardless of the strategic costs. Let's bring this all together. Kharg Island is a 5-mile coral island in the Persian Gulf that handles 90% of Iran's crude oil exports through loading facilities capable of processing 7 million barrels per day. It was spared for the first 2 weeks of the war as a strategic reserve and leverage tool. Tonight, Trump ordered strikes on every military target on the island while explicitly sparing the oil infrastructure, and issued a direct ultimatum that the oil infrastructure will be destroyed if Iran does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz. JP Morgan analysis says full Kharg infrastructure destruction could put half of Iran's oil output at risk and collapse the buffer that keeps global prices from spiking catastrophically. The next Iranian decision, whether to comply, escalate, or negotiate through the yuan trade proposal that a senior official floated to CNN, will determine whether tonight's strikes were the turning point that ended this war or the escalation that made it significantly worse. If this explainer gave you the context you needed to understand the day's most important story, please hit the like button and subscribe for daily updates. Drop a comment with your read on what Iran will do next. I will see you in the next one.